Max Crosby is back in the Bears rumor mill, straight from Adam Schefter's mouth. And in a minute, I'll tell you why that rumor hides more risk than it looks. Meanwhile, Ryan Poles already locked his own move. Darnell Wright just signed $93 million guaranteed, the richest contract in history for an offensive lineman. And I'll break down why Poles had zero urgency to pull the trigger right now. And at Hollis Hall, there's a new name stealing every August practice, one nobody in the Windy City saw coming. Bear down, fam. Let's get into it. Okay, let's break this down piece by piece, because a lot of people are going to hear Crosby to the Bears and assume something is imminent, and it is not. I need to be honest right away. This is speculation from an insider, not an offer, not an active negotiation, not a sources confirm report. And as a channel, that distinction matters to me, because if I do not mark it clearly, I am being just as irresponsible as any rumor account on social media chasing clicks. What actually happened this week is this. Adam Schefter was talking on his podcast alongside Ty Schmidt about Max Crosby's future in Las Vegas, and he said, word for word, that right now the plan is for Crosby to stay a Raider. But then came the but, and that but is what lit this whole thing back up. Schefter said that if the Raiders do not start the season well and we get close to the trade deadline in the first week of November, that is when Crosby's name could come back into real conversation. And when he was asked point blank which teams could be interested, the Bears were one of the names mentioned. That's it. That's the base story. Now, why do I think this deserves real attention instead of getting dismissed as August noise? Because of the context behind Crosby, and because of something he said about Caleb Williams recently that connects directly to this conversation. Who Max Crosby is, and why any mention of his name makes a Bears fan sit up straight. Let's be clear about the level of player we're talking about. Crosby is a 5-time Pro Bowl edge rusher. Last season he finished with 10 sacks and a career-high 28 tackles for loss. In a year the Raiders finished 3-14. In other words, he produced individually, even while the team around him was falling apart. That kind of production in the middle of chaos is exactly the kind of player any defensive coordinator dreams of having, and it is exactly what Dennis Allen does not have in Chicago right now. And here's where I have to drop my unfiltered opinion, because I have been saying this on the channel for months. The Bears' pass rush is still the biggest structural hole on this roster. Montez Sweat is a good player, consistent, the most reliable guy in the group, but after him, what do we have? Austin Booker's still trying to confirm he can be a real edge 2 threat. Dayo Odingbo, who I'll get to in the third story today, coming off Achilles surgery and a $48 million contract that so far has been, to be generous, disappointing. And Shamar Turner still in recovery from his own knee injury. That's the full picture. It is not a group that scares anybody in the NFC. So when a name like Crosby comes up, even hypothetically, even conditioned on things going wrong in Las Vegas first, both my fan brain and my analyst brain fire at the same time. Because this actually connects to something real. If Poles sees his pass rush still unresolved by October, and if Crosby remains available on the market because of the Raiders situation, that combination of conditions could genuinely turn into something concrete. The context almost nobody's bringing up, what happened with the Ravens in March. And here's something I have to bring up because it gives this whole conversation a completely different texture. Crosby already got burned by his own body in a trade earlier this year. Back in March, the Ravens reached an agreement with the Raiders to acquire Crosby in exchange for 2 first-round picks, one from 2026 and one from 2027. It was the first time in that franchise's history they gave up a first-round pick for a veteran player. Crosby even posted an emotional goodbye video to Las Vegas fans. And then the trade fell apart. Crosby failed his physical in Baltimore. He'd had surgery in January for a torn meniscus, and even though his agent publicly insisted the recovery was, in his words, ahead of schedule, the Ravens decided not to take the risk and backed out. Baltimore got their 2 first-round picks back and ended up pivoting to Trey Hendrickson instead. I think this is crucial to mention here, because if at some point in October or November we hear the Bears are seriously evaluating a Crosby trade, that medical history is going to be a mandatory part of any serious analysis. I'm not saying Crosby is damaged goods. His agent and his own surgeon both insisted the recovery was going well. But a team that already backed out over medical concerns is information every Bears fan needs before getting excited about this name. I could be overplaying the caution here, but I'd rather err careful than sell you a fantasy with no nuance attached. What Crosby said about Caleb Williams and why it actually matters for this story. Now, the part that personally caught my attention the most. Crosby had Caleb Williams on his own podcast, The Rush. And he said something there that did not go unnoticed by anyone covering this league. He told Williams, and I'm paraphrasing the spirit of it because the respect in that moment was genuine and direct, that he respects him on a different level, that Williams himself does not even understand yet how good he can become, and that the two of them are locked in together no matter what happens. Listen, those are not words a veteran at Crosby's position drops just to be polite on a podcast. That kind of explicit respect between an elite pass rusher and a young quarterback on another team, said on camera, in a format both of them knew would go viral, tells me something real about how Crosby views the Chicago project. And yes, I'm adding the speculative layer here on purpose. If Crosby ever has to choose a destination in a trade, that kind of public admiration for the quarterback on the other side is not a minor detail. All that said, the current reality is that Crosby is happy in Las Vegas. He called himself a Raider for life, and he's about to start the season under a new head coach, Clint Kubiak. The Raiders chose Kirk Cousins as the starter over rookie Fernando Mendoza, which, to be honest, already makes me question how much that team is actually going to improve from last year's disaster. And that is exactly where Schefter's condition comes from. My prediction, with all the uncertainty that comes with it, look, here's my position, and I want to be clear. This is a conditional prediction, not a certainty. I believe that if two things happen, first, the Raiders start the season losing consistently under Kubiak, and second, the Bears' pass rush is still unresolved heading into the November trade deadline, then we will see a real, non-speculative conversation between Poles and the Las Vegas front office. Before that, this stays exactly where it is right now in the territory of possibility, fueled by podcast comments and by an insider doing his job, generating content during August, which is a dead month for NFL news. And honestly, I got burned once before getting too excited too fast about an elite pass rusher trade rumor. I remember Yannick Ngakoue back in 2021 perfectly well. He showed up midseason, and all of us thought we finally had a real rusher, and 6 months later he was already playing for another team because it never fully clicked. That scar is still there. So this time, I'm trying to keep my feet on the ground until we see something more concrete than a reporter's. It could happen if, no matter how reliable Schefter usually is. All right, after all that speculation, I needed this next story, and I think you did too. Because this one is 100% real, it's already signed, and it's one of the best front office decisions Ryan Poles has made during his tenure. The Bears and right tackle Darnell Wright agreed to a 4-year extension worth $116 million, with $93 million guaranteed. According to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler and Ian Rappaport, that $93 million guaranteed is the highest figure ever given to an offensive lineman in NFL history. Not the highest for a right tackle. The highest for any offensive lineman at any position in the history of the league. Let me say that again because it genuinely feels enormous. No offensive lineman ever had received that much guaranteed money before Wright got it this week. On average, annual value, Wright is set to earn $29 million per season, which makes him the highest paid right tackle in the NFL. There's only one tackle in the entire league earning more per year than him, and that's Laramie Tunsil of the Commanders, at $30.1 million annually, but Tunsil plays the left side. Among right tackles, Wright is, without question, the king of the market right now. Why this extension landed right now, and what it tells me about how Poles thinks. Here's a detail I think matters for understanding the whole strategy. The Bears had already exercised Wright's 5th-year option back in April, which technically kept them in control of the player through 2027, without needing to negotiate anything new yet. There was no contractual urgency, but they extended him anyway. They did it after just 6 training camp practices. That is not a reactive decision. That is Poles watching the tackle market move, watching what Tunsil had just gotten paid back in March, and deciding to lock up his guy before the price kept climbing or before Wright hit a contract year and started generating media noise about his future. And I think there's something deeper here too. Wright said last week, before the deal even closed, that he knew he was going to be in Chicago for a long time, possibly his whole career, and that those things handle themselves. That level of calm from a player who was about to sign the biggest contract in his position's history tells me the relationship between Wright and this organization was already in a place of real mutual trust, not tense negotiation. That, to me, is a sign of healthy locker room culture, something this roster needed after years of chaos surrounding the offensive line. The player behind the contract, why Wright earned every dollar. Let's talk about the player, because the contract only makes sense if we understand the trajectory. Wright was picked 10th overall in the 2023 draft out of Tennessee. He started all 17 games as a rookie, which is already rare for a first-year tackle. He repeated 16 starts in year 2. And in 2025, under Ben Johnson's system, he made the leap we were all expecting. Second-team All-Pro honors in a season where he helped the Bears' offense go from last in total yards in 2024 to 6th in the entire league in 2025. Now, here's where I want to be the channel that makes the honest correction others skip. I found a discrepancy between sources over Wright's exact Pro Football Focus ranking. One ESPN report, citing PFF data, has him at 14th among all tackles in the league with an 81.4 grade. But the Chicago Sun-Times, covering the same extension, has him at 15th. The numbers are nearly identical, the gap is tiny, but as a channel that takes accuracy seriously, I'd rather tell you that with the discrepancy laid out than pretend I have one clean exact number when the sources don't fully agree. What every source does agree on is that, per ESPN, Wright finished 4th in the entire league in pass block win rate. For anyone unfamiliar, that metric measures how often a lineman wins his individual block in passing situations before the rusher reaches the quarterback. 4th in the whole NFL in that metric is absurd for a third-year player. And here's the stat that matters most to me as a fan who has watched the Bears suffer on the offensive line for years. Wright has played all 49 NFL games he's been available for since arriving, including all 17 of his rookie season. Durability, at a position where injuries wreck careers and team plans constantly, is an asset polls can point to directly as justification for this deal, what this means for the rest of the roster. And this is where I tie it all together, because this extension does not live in isolation. According to the Sun-Times, it's the 5th multi-year extension of the Ben Johnson era, following Josh Blackwell, TJ Edwards, Joe Thuney, and Tyson Bagent last year. That tells me Poles is building a clear philosophy. Identify homegrown talent, develop it inside Johnson's system, and pay it before the outside market takes it away. That's the opposite of the reactive mindset we saw from this organization in previous years, where it always felt like we were putting out contract fires instead of getting ahead of them. But there's also an uncomfortable side I have to mention, because it would be dishonest not to. The Bears are already tight against the 2026 cap, and looming on the horizon are even bigger contracts. Caleb Williams is going to need his extension at some point in 2027, and Rome Odunze and Colston Loveland probably won't be far behind if their production keeps trending the way we expect. Every dollar committed to Wright now is a dollar. Poles has to plan more carefully around going forward. That's not a problem today. But it's a variable this channel's going to keep tracking closely, because this roster's contention window depends on that math working out. And I want to be clear here with my opinion, not just drop the stat and move on. It took me years to stop suffering watching Justin Fields run for his life behind a patchwork offensive line, so seeing Poles pay his own tackle before the market forced his hand feels like an organization that finally learned the lesson. It's not perfect. There's still cap risk down the road, but it's the kind of proactive move this fan has been begging for years. And to close things out, let's head over to Hollis Hall, where 3 things happened this week that individually look small, but together tell me a lot about the health and depth of this roster heading into September. TJ. Edwards is back, and it matters more than it seems. First, TJ Edwards was activated off the non-football injury list this Wednesday after being placed there with a calf injury. He was back at practice, doing his mandatory 40 up-downs while the rest of the defense watched, which is basically this team's slightly awkward welcome back ritual for anyone returning from an injury list. Edwards is the linebacker who runs Dennis Allen's defense from the middle of the field, the guy making the calls, adjusting the fronts. Having him back before the regular season starts, after signing his own extension last year, is one of those stories that does not generate clicks, but that anyone who actually understands this defense's structure knows is huge. Dayo Odeyingbo, the motivation story that needs a cautious follow-up, second, and this connects directly to what I talked about in the first story about the pass rush. Dayo Odeyingbo is having, according to every report coming out of camp this week, a surprisingly solid return from his torn Achilles. He worked from the interior of the defensive line on passing downs, and even came away with an interception off a Tyson Bagent pass that got batted at the line of scrimmage. He's participated fully through the entire first week of camp, which, coming off an Achilles injury, is already a positive sign on its own. He also attended the SAC Summit this summer, a kind of gathering for pass rushers around the league where players work on technique together, something like the defensive version of the OL Masterminds we've talked about before on this channel. Now, my job as an analytical channel is not to get carried away by camp hype alone. And I have to be honest about my own track record of getting too excited over camp names. I remember Velus Jones Jr. back in 2022 camp, when all of us were talking about his speed like it was the answer to the receiver problem, and we all know how that story ended. That's exactly why I try to put an extra filter on any motivated comeback story in August. Odeyingbo signed a 3-year, $48 million contract. And so far, that investment has been, to be generous, disappointing. In 8 games last season before his injury, he had 21 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 single sack, and 4 quarterback hits. Those numbers do not justify that contract. So yes, I'm genuinely glad to see him motivated and healthy. But I could be wrong to get excited too quickly about this specific player again, because he's already let us down once since arriving in Chicago. The difference this time is that if he's truly healthy and playing with the motivation these reports describe, that solves exactly the problem I mentioned in the first story: the lack of reliable depth behind Montez Sweat. Caden Davis, the name nobody knew that all of Chicago is now saying out loud. And the third one, the one I most enjoyed digging into this week, Caden Davis, a receiver who signed back in June out of the UFL, after bouncing around at 8 different teams since going undrafted in 2022, caught the attention of every beat reporter covering camp with a one-handed sliding grab in the corner of the end zone off a pass from Caleb Williams during a 7-on-7 period. Brad Biggs of the Chicago Tribune was one of the first to highlight it publicly, and several other outlets have been following him closely ever since. Listen, Davis's story is exactly the kind of narrative I love telling on this channel. This guy played just 3 NFL games in his entire career, all with the Browns, with 0 confirmed regular season receptions. He went through the Broncos, the Cardinals twice, briefly the Lions in 2024, which happens to be exactly when he overlapped with Ben Johnson and receivers coach Antoine Randall, and now, on his 8th professional stop, he's making plays that get veteran beat reporters stopping mid-practice in August camp to write about him. They call him White Lightning. And honestly, fam, these anonymous player stories that steal a moment are exactly what makes loving this team worth it, even during the frustrating years. Is he going to make the 53-man roster? Here, I have to be realistic. Competition at receiver is intense, with Rome Odunzo, Luther Burden, and the whole veteran group fighting for space. Davis will probably end up on the practice squad if he can't earn a specific special teams role as a kick returner, which is his other recognized skill. But for a channel that follows this franchise game by game, player by player, these are exactly the stories that make every camp practice worth watching. Not just the regular season games. And there you have it, fam. 3 stories, 3 completely different emotions. A trade rumor that needs to be handled with real caution, not cheap hype. A historic contract that shows this front office is finally thinking with long-term vision. And a set of camp stories that, together, tell me this roster's depth is being built piece by piece, even with real questions still unresolved, especially in that pass rush I've been talking about all video. I don't know about you, but I'm still left with more questions than answers about whether Crosby ever ends up in Chicago, and I'd rather leave it that way than sell you a certainty I don't have. Tell me in the comments, would you make that trade in October if the chance comes up, even with the medical history attached? Drop it below, hit like if this breakdown helped you out, and I'll see you in the next one. Bear down, always.